Hello and welcome to the Teaching Excellence podcast. I am joined again today by Joanne Miles. Hi, Joanne.
Hello, Steph. Nice to be with you.
How are you?
I'm really good, thank you.
Good. So we have kind of got into this little routine of just catching up regularly, and I really love it actually because we get to talk about what we're both seeing, who we're talking to, what's coming up, and then it gets us thinking about just what's going on in terms of quality teaching and learning, and we can have a bit of a debate about it, can't we? So yeah, what have you been up to? How have you been?
I've been doing lots of exciting things, and I'm with you in that I think so much is going on that almost we could talk every day and there'd be a new thing to discuss, because I feel as if the schools and colleges where I'm doing support are evolving new ways of working, and things are literally developing by the week. So probably the most exciting thing for me to talk about first, interesting thing with lots of challenges in it, is this notion of the hybrid model
Yes.
that I've experienced as a trainer doing CPD recently.
Yeah.
So hybrid model, my understanding is this is around having some learners who are in the physical classroom with you,
Yeah.
but simultaneously the rest of the class might be at home streaming it live.
And there's quite a lot of that going on. There's lots of discussion on Twitter about it. There's people that are speaking to me and, like say, with you about this, navigating this new people in different places.
Simultaneously. And
Yeah.
it's kind of interesting that I feel like it's emerged in schools and colleges as a kind of, it's just needed because we haven't got physical space in a distancing
Yes.
way in rooms.
Yes.
What's our easiest second approach is maybe some of them are at home. So I
Yeah.
almost feel like the decision has come more from practicality than from actually looking at the research. So I started to hear about this initially from colleagues saying, God, it's really complicated to actually have people in two spaces. How do we navigate that?
Mhm.
When I started to read, I thought, let's look at what this thing is. So my understanding is it's called hybrid. The research that I've managed to pick up is mainly emerging from the States, and a
Okay.
lot of it is from HE. So it's a
Mhm.
university setting.
Yeah, and if you think about the drive for recording lectures, and yeah, like you say, there are some students that would join a course and be distance learners.
Yes.
So you
Yes.
can imagine that it has been happening.
Yes, absolutely. And in the States, it seems to have merged as a kind of the hyflex version, which is
Mhm.
giving people the choice. Do I want to be in the room doing the seminar or the lecture, or actually that week, does it suit me to be at home because I've got a commitment later in the day? Obviously, everything is then recorded so that you can access it later. So it's kind of a customer preference idea emerging from the work in the States. Here, I think it's just been adopted for that practical reason. The complexity for me is this issue of the skills involved in planning and delivering that. But as the initial point of trauma, I think a difficulty is the tech.
Yes.
The research around it from the States, they say to make it work really effectively for both groups, the ones at home and the ones in the classroom,
Mm.
we need technology that has significantly high quality microphones in the
Yeah.
classroom,
Yeah.
so that the people at home can actually talk to their classmates and not be kind of isolated in, these are the people in the virtual box stuck at home, but that
Yeah.
they can't actually speak and
Yeah.
hear each other well.
Yeah, because there's going to be that void between who's speaking where, isn't there? There's a gap between speakers, there might be delays, there might be,
Yes.
and how do you interact? How do you get those two groups to interact and, like you say, one not feel isolated from the other?
That's right. And the research is suggesting if you don't manage the technology and the classroom skills effectively, what you get is this kind of non-equitable situation in learning where the ones at home really are kind of watching. It's almost like watching
Yeah.
video, can't participate fully, can't engage fully, and are not really included in terms of adjustments as the session goes on. So there's a real challenge about the technology first. But the second thing is how to plan activities that would work in both spaces. And
Yeah.
whether you're going to actually have the people who are in the virtual boxes, say, doing a collaborative tasks together, if you're
Mhm.
working through Zoom or through
Yeah.
breakouts in
Yeah.
different platforms, could you put them together? Can you therefore do a group task in the room?
Mhm.
But then the complexity is the timing and the sequencing. My experience in blended learning is you need to chunk things down quite small. And
Yes.
as I'm doing more of it online, I'm realizing the chunks need to keep up momentum, need to be quite small. So maybe 5 minutes on a topic, doing a discussion, talking about slides, doing Q&A, and then moving to something different is what's needed. Whereas in a classroom, you can sustain much longer
Yeah.
tasks with
Yeah.
more depth and more interaction. So trying to think about your planning in terms of suiting both spaces.
And this
I
is
think it's
where,
way
like,
more complex than
it's
people may have
so
initially thought.
it's so complex. And you have, if you start, we always talk about pedagogy first,
Yes, yes,
pedagogy and people first,
exactly.
you know, and how you use those sort of principles to drive what you do. That, but then you have this additional layer of complexity, which is about how you ensure it's not an unequal experience
Totally right.
for both groups. And I know people are, the things that I'm seeing or hearing is that things take quite a lot longer.
Absolutely.
Think
Absolutely.
the pace is much slower.
Uh-huh.
That, like you say, the chunks need to be smaller,
Yes.
and the instructions
Wow.
need to be much clearer
Crystal
and
clear.
very specific.
Totally with you. And I
Yeah,
think those watching people and also trying it myself in the last couple of weeks,
yeah,
I think the instructions need to be verbal, they need to be reinforced verbally, they need to be visually available on the
yeah,
screen, on the
yes,
slides. If you're putting them into breakout, they need to be in the chat box or on the Google form or the Microsoft form that people are
yeah,
using, because there's this loss of focus and loss of task completion often because the instructions aren't maybe placed in the right form and in the right place.
yeah. And then the other part of the discussion, which is actually quite exciting, and you know, this is probably where people need to reflect on what technology they're using. And it's not about we always have this conversation, like, it's not about technology for technology's sake.
Yes,
It's about the technology is the solution to a challenge.
exactly. It's the
So,
vehicle or the tool.
yes, and the challenge at this point is, how do you get, we all know collaborative working is powerful.
Mm,
How do you create that? Either, we'll talk about purely online in a minute, but how do you get people working together if they're in two different spaces, or
absolutely.
even in the same space? So some will be online, some are in the classroom, but in a socially distanced
Wow,
way physically. So
absolutely.
this is where the technology, you know, shared documents, or shared, whether it be an online whiteboard, whether it be, you know, Google have Jamboard, whether it's
Exactly.
Google Docs, whether it's whatever that shared space is, whether it's Padlet, you know,
Yes,
all of
good.
those things, then you can get anybody in any, wherever they are in the world ultimately, to input, record their thoughts, put their thinking down in whatever that space is that's the use of technology.
Absolutely.
So I'm hearing people do that, and I'm hearing that there's real successes with that. But again, you've got to get familiar with it, you've got to use it, you've got to know where you're putting your instructions,
Completely.
and so it is a big ask. The solutions are there. There are
Yes.
people out there sharing how they're using these things, which is great.
Yes.
I went and attended a little webinar on development of maths and technology, and there's
Uh-huh.
lots of thinking at the minute around maths English, which is amazing, and how technology can really enhance that at the minute. So, but yeah, it's really interesting because you don't have the same, even the teacher from a socially distanced perspective in the classroom doesn't have the same, you can't move around the same, you can't do the same, you can't be the same in that space.
Absolutely.
And then to have students online as well,
Completely.
there's so much to think about.
Some people have said to me, some teachers who've been doing this for the last couple of weeks have said they're doing things like two main approaches really with the collaboration if they've got some students in class and some at home. They've been having all the computers in the classroom for the ones who are live in the room.
Yeah.
So the students are logging on so that if there's a collaborative task, they can be paired with somebody at home to work on a Microsoft Teams doc or a Google Doc or on a Padlet, for example, on a virtual wall where they can store ideas together. They've then got the main screen up where you can see the virtual image of the people at home. You've got the chat field visible. So everybody can interact in the chat. The teacher can be drawing comments from there, which are linked to the people at home or the people in the room.
Mm-hmm.
And also at certain points, they can bring people to the screen to talk. So this notion of hot seat in the room is quite interesting, getting somebody in the classroom to come up really quite close to the main screen where the people at home are watching and be able to comment and talk. And that's emerged from people just thinking, how do I get people to feel closer? And
Yeah.
part of that is the screen coming up close like you and I are, so that I could talk to you at home
Yeah.
and feel connected instead of sitting way back in a room. So I think you're right. There are ways to make it work, but that implies completely different thinking in your planning. As
Mhm.
you said, the tech skills to be able to execute that smoothly and
Yeah.
not bog down your lesson. And what I've noticed trying some of this is one of the problems for the teacher is you're then paying attention to mechanics, right?
Yes.
You're
And
going, does
yeah.
my pad link work? Who's who? How many have I got? Am I pairing that one with that one? Is my breakout okay? You're
Yeah.
not focusing actually on learning and people
Mm.
in the same way, which I think is part of the challenge with all of these new things that we're trying to adopt.
It's like the example of you going back to that place of thinking about what you the ins and outs, and there are benefits of that,
Yes,
because we are ultimately thinking about teaching and learning as a practice,
yes,
evolving teaching and learning as a practice, real time,
yes,
dealing with the challenges that we face, and the trying to find the solutions. But it is a lot,
it's a
and
lot to juggle. Pressure, pressure.
so much pressure, and the amount of overwhelm that people will be
Yeah,
feeling. And then I keep thinking about how when you're that overloaded and you feel and it's that challenging, you're slightly more reluctant to keep trying new things all the time because you get
that's right.
burnout with thinking.
That's right. And it's
Yeah.
like this kind of innovation fatigue of I'm having to innovate and feel like I'm on thin ice all the time. The other day I tried something where I thought, actually, is it going to work if the task that I've designed would work really beautifully in the room in distanced groups? It could also work virtually in breakout, but it might be tweaked. So in the end, I made two slightly different versions on my instructions,
Yeah.
and I put my breakout cluster together in the box, and then I left the ones in the room. I wasn't even in the building. So I had a facilitator. I mean, it was mad. I had a facilitator in the room being my kind of face on the ground. But actually, that meant that the ones in the room could do more room type activity, which, as you said, is different from
Yes.
what might work in the box. So I think there's also this option in hybrid of actually having two slightly different tasks operating, so that means you can plan to make the most of each space.
Yeah. And what we don't want is people having to do lots of everything.
No.
But as we get cleverer or smarter
Yeah,
or efficient, and hopefully we continue with the ethos of sharing, collaborating,
absolutely.
it is about helping people to think through
Yeah.
how it might be tweaked ever so slightly. That doesn't mean lots more work,
No.
but allows for the tweaking and the adaptation for the two different groups.
Totally right. Because the other problem, I think, is if we don't think about the classroom as a physical classroom space, what we're really doing is operating in online learning in terms of our methodology. Those learners in the classroom, unless they're getting a classroom focused experience, may as well be at home on computer as
Yeah,
well.
yeah,
So the thing about actually, I'm in a classroom, I want to use I want to use small whiteboards. I want to use flip chart paper and post-its in socially distanced ways. I want the groups to sit separately, but be able to talk in a human way across
yeah,
maybe 15
yeah.
minutes. Yeah. So I think we want to try and keep the best of both spaces, but the amount of thinking that is involving for people, I can really see that challenge of workload,
Yeah. And I
of
think
creativity
I'm
needed.
passionate at the minute, and we usually do chat about the solutions. We always are
Yeah.
solutions focused, and we chat about how we can navigate the challenges without dismissing how challenging it is.
Completely. No, totally
And I
agree.
think if we think about the solutions in this part, this is where coaching teams,
Mhm.
the people who are in colleges, who are not people to go around and tell people how to teach.
No,
They are the people that can help teachers to think through their planning,
totally.
think through their nuances, their challenges, the needs of their classrooms. And it's almost like I've always been really passionate about collaborative planning because I think it's
Yes,
really powerful.
it's so great.
And it has a big payoff, to have someone who is a coach working with someone to help think through, but not tell them how to teach.
Completely.
That's two different things. But helping people to think through and collaboratively plan, and I found you can't sit there and help someone to plan for their full timetable, but
No,
if you spend the 1 or 2 hours a week planning collaborative planning at one of the sessions for the following week, that person can then apply those principles across
Couldn't
their
agree more.
whole, yes, their whole teaching load.
It's like getting a skeleton or a template, isn't it, of how it could work. You
Yeah,
can then drop different activities or different tech into that, but it's almost getting a sense of, this is how I might do a little bit of presenting content. These are 2 options for doing my conversation work, because we want it to be interactive. This is
yeah,
2 ways I might do pair work.
yeah,
This is how I might do the plenary. And that then becomes your skeleton of, I can use that again
yeah.
and again and again. And that will save people on the prep time. I think you're absolutely right. The processing, the thinking it out together, I think it's really important to have those conversations, because as we think, we start to problem solve, we start to think about options, we start to make the choices, instead of just jumping to, oh, this is the way I feel maybe most comfortable, or that I'm used to doing it,
Yeah.
that may not be good for fit for purpose at the moment. So I think those conversations with coaches and advanced practitioners and colleagues that you trust are going to be invaluable for people. Absolutely with you on that.
And I can't remember if I said this last time, but I am convinced if you scrapped all other CPD for this year and just created those spaces for people to collaboratively plan and think through what they were doing,
Yeah,
it
invaluable.
would be huge impact
And
still.
so much support, because people are definitely, some people are feeling strain already, some people are feeling isolated, underskilled. We need to continue to build those spaces. We need discussions in team meetings, we need virtual professional learning communities, we need the coaches dropping in if people are actually
Yeah,
in
like
classrooms,
I feel quite,
works rooms.
yeah, really passionate about just ditch the notices,
Yeah,
on an email or in a
yeah,
different place that people can read, or do a recorded
completely briefing of
10
messages.
minute
Yeah, completely.
briefing, and then
Podcast the messages. Yeah,
yeah, do the space thinking together stuff. Do
completely.
your notices different? And so I challenge slash support anyone to do that and just
Yes.
see the difference in people feeling supported. Because I think it's really important. One of the other thing that's cropping up in a few different places is where people are teaching completely online,
Right.
and then having or feeling the need or having the instruction
Yes.
to mark slash give feedback on literally everything that's produced within a lesson.
Wow.
And I haven't, I'm obviously not doing that at the minute, but
Yes.
in the conversation, I'm trying to get to the bottom of what's going on. And so the idea is that because you're not in the classroom, they've upped the ante on the amount of feedback or the amount of marking that's happening.
Yeah.
So that, if the task is about write a paragraph on this, whether it's on their own or whether it's together, then they're being collected in and the tutors are marking every single sort of effort that's made online. And I think that is total, like that's going to cause us some real problems if we're not careful.
I think that's really not sustainable, and I'd really question whether it's actually desirable or needed in terms of learning improvement. So if you think about formative assessment, getting learners to do self and peer reflection,
Mm.
helping learners to make, well, teachers to signal error and get learners to recorrect their own work using, DIRT, so
Yeah.
directed improvement and reflection time, which is something that is really kind of coming to life in many settings. Those approaches which are triggering action from the learner, I think, are way more valuable than a teacher plowing through every single thing that's been submitted.
Yeah, I
I
mean,
think that's not a productive use of the time necessarily.
no, people are feeling completely overwhelmed. There's now sort of, I mean, we haven't quantified it really, but 3-4 times the amount of marking,
Wow,
and that was a biggie anyway.
completely. And that's always been a problem. Enough for the big report around marking,
Yes.
from Education Endowment Foundation, I
Yeah,
think.
I went. That was the place that I went straight to, and I'm pointing over there because I've got it up on my screen.
Okay.
But yeah, there's a lot of research around feedback. We know this. There's lots of evidence about the power of feedback,
Yes.
and the use of formative assessment to
Yes.
improve slash, enhance teaching and learning. So what I'm aware of is that the principles of everything we know, we can't just directly apply them to everything we're currently doing because we haven't been in the situation that we're
That's right.
in at the minute. However, for me, the principles are the principles, and let's just start there. Let's not make up something from a place of fear.
No. And a place of insecurity and not understanding, maybe.
Yes, let's go to the evidence. Let's go to the research. Let's look at the stuff that's come out of all the research.
Yes.
And that doesn't mean, the reason I like the Education Endowment Foundation is because it's really readable.
Yes.
We as a sector, we don't need to wade through research paper after research paper. It's all in their teaching and learning toolkit, I think it's
That's
called.
right, because they're reviewing. It's like meta review, isn't it? Meta-analysis of other
so
research
do the
reviews.
summaries, and it's very easy. So there's a bit on feedback that I'm looking at the minute. It mentions peer and self-marking.
Exactly,
And
because it's
review.
active.
Yeah, it's got a written marking review on there. I'm looking at it on the screen. And all of that does not tell us that we need to mark or comment on every piece of students' thinking or work or submission.
I think the problem for me is that actually marking in and of itself, so the teacher just sitting and putting marks on something and then giving it to students, is not the same as feedback that drives feed forward action, right? So for me, the important thing is, am I feeding back key messages for the individual and the group? And am I making sure they do something with that? Because otherwise it's just marking, which is just administrative bureaucracy almost, of looking at something and writing some comments on it. For me, it's the next steps that are the important things. So things like group marking, where you look at a series of pieces of work, you skim read a series of pieces of work, and you pull out key messages to give your class. And then feeding that back through a document, feeding it back to a sound file using something like Vocaroo, feeding it back in the live learning and saying, actually, here are 6 messages for the group about that last piece of work. Can we now review together? That's useful for the learning and the shifting behaviour and skills going forward. That's where I think we need to pay attention.
Yeah, and I used to do that in my HE groups, actually, because they were really keen to get some feedback very quickly.
Yes.
When you've got a biggish group, you can't mark them all in, we had, I think it was 14 days turnaround time. But within the first 3 or 4 days, I would read maybe 4 or 5 of them. I'd get 4 or 5 marked, and I was able to give them sort of 5 or 6 pieces of information that said, this is generally what's being done well. These are the common things that probably could be better.
Great.
So they had a bit of a reflection quickly. It meant then they had a bit of an idea whether they thought they'd done good or not before they got their full feedback. But the other bit of that was that it was either on a slide, and I went through it at the beginning of like one of the lessons, or it was recorded, or it was written on a document and I put it on the VLE. So that every time after that they did an assignment, whether it was for my module or a different module, they could look at that and use it to help inform how to improve their work in somebody else's module on a different subject.
Completely.
Because it was always written in a way that was about that helped with feed forward.
The feed forward. It's like the common mistakes checklist that I used to use a lot, and lots of teachers I work with are really adopting, where you think about in that assignment, what are the common things that people have problems with? And you have like 5 ways to have problems on this assignment and 5 ways to do well. And you're kind of front loading that information to try and make them able to think about avoiding the pitfalls and following the advice. So I think we need to be much more thoughtful and much more evidence-based about how we're bringing approaches to marking and feedback into the online spaces. I'm totally with you. Otherwise, we're going to bog down all that time with something that won't necessarily drive improvement.
And this is where technology can be the solution to the challenge. So how can we use technology to get the peer marking and collaboration? We'll talk about collaboration a little bit because that's popping up. But, how do we use technology to do that? How do we enhance self-reflection through coaching models and what I call like supercharged coaching questions? How can we use those coaching questions to help students reflect on their work? What do they need to do to improve? The power of metacognition, self-regulation. The evidence is there.
Absolutely.
And how can we do that? And then the other bit of technology that can help us to enhance feedback, I think, is the recording, whether that's just an audio file or, because I'm a very visual person, if someone recorded over a PowerPoint slide or a document to explain something,
Yes.
That would probably land really well with me.
Like Loom is great for that, isn't it?
Yeah,
Where you can put your slides up that have the points,
yes,
or you can share your document that has the comments on,
yeah,
and then you can either talk over with yourself being visible in the corner, or you can just be not visible, which I think
yeah,
is quite great for not distracting people. And then it's saved as a URL link that you can then email to your students. So it's really, really easy, really quick, and
yeah.
it's just a plug-in on your Chrome toolbar.
Yeah, and you can just like you say, you can just put that video in your VLE,
Completely.
and you're not, I'm like anti-email,
Yeah.
but you don't even have to. It just becomes part of the learning journey then,
Completely. That's right. It
and
can sit in one place, like in a repository that people can
yeah,
then learn to access gradually.
yeah.
Absolutely.
So yeah, it's really interesting. I think that's where if we can amplify the solutions around feedback and like I say, it's not really about the marking, but there will be tools that help people to mark easier, quicker, or give more feedback. But it's about the efficiency. This is where I'm really passionate about. This is where we need to be clever about the innovation.
Yeah,
This is where we don't need to innovate and innovate till we get innovation fatigue. We need to
completely.
look at where are the bottlenecks,
That's right.
what are the things that are having the biggest impact on well-being at this point,
Completely.
and how can we use technology to be a solution to those things.
Absolutely agree with you. And a lot of that comes back to what you said about putting the pedagogy at the center and then selecting the tool that suits. So it's grounding everything in. Actually, for learning, we need interaction.
Yeah.
We need to present information in thought-provoking ways.
Yeah.
We need learners to be able to practice.
Yes.
And we need to be able to give feedback that drives feed forward. It's which tools, choosing one or two tools that will suit our toolkit to enable us to embody that pedagogy in our practice.
Yeah.
It's not finding 28,000 things to do that. It's not marking every single word that a learner writes on a collaborative document. I
No.
mean, I think some of these practices, we've really got to ground ourselves back in what do we know about how learning works and how our practice has evolved, and not go off down a cul-de-sac. And to me, that sounds like a real cul-de-sac and really dangerous for people's mental health and well-being.
For me, I'm laughing now because when I'm really visual. So when you say down a cul-de-sac, for me, I went to like white water rapid.
Go, okay, even worse.
Yeah, bit treacherous. There might be a waterfall off the edge of it.
Oh gosh.
But yeah, it's not. First and foremost, we need to be thinking about innovation that's going to support well-being. And
Yes.
one of the things that I've been thinking about recently, and I've put out some stuff, is around quality improvement to support teacher well-being.
Yes.
If we're innovative with the teaching and learning and the technology, we won't buy back anybody's time,
No.
but I doubt we're going to get to a place where technology will save us so many hours that we're sat around twiddling our thumbs. That's never going to
No.
happen.
No. No. No.
In the sector that we're in, it's just never going to happen. But we can use the technology to find the solutions to support well-being. And
Yes.
because what is happening in places, because people are a bit fearful, is not, like you say, not sustainable.
No. And we've so got to be thoughtful, because at this point in the year, I feel like we've only just started. Things are getting worse, if we're honest, pretty much all over the country to differing degrees. It's going to get more disruptive than now. And we're going to have to snap back in and out of these models. We're going to have to master some learners at home, some teachers at home.
Yes.
Sometimes we're going to have to be fully online, inevitably. I think that's going to come at
Yeah.
some point, which is, again, is a different way of thinking about your planning. So we're going to have to keep flexing our approach and have that confidence that we're clear on, actually, when I'm structuring it for online, it's bite-sized, it's this for them to interact, it's this for me to give feedback, and it's this for me to do plenaries, for example. Having a kind of basic toolkit that isn't too overwhelming would really put people into a good position as we go further into the autumn. And I think sprawling out into marking everything, having 10 ways of giving feedback, all of these approaches will actually bog people down and make people feel more overwhelmed, which is not the idea.
No, and we've got to keep it simple. I've just wrote that down on my piece of
Keep
paper.
it simple.
Got to keep it simple. Just let's keep peeling it back. Let's
Yes.
keep going
What do
back.
we really need?
Yes. What do we need and what do
Yes.
we know?
Yes. Yes.
And
Yes.
let's stay in that place. And then it doesn't matter which tool you use. And it's
Yes.
not about just using one. It's not about using 100. It's
No.
just over time. And this is where, like supported experiments and, like say, professional learning communities,
Yeah.
like really comes into its own.
Completely.
Because if it is, if you choose, and it's hard to choose one priority at the minute, I understand that. But
Yeah.
if it is that formative assessment is the biggie for you, or your team or your college, then let's focus our conversations and our collaborative planning and our
Yeah.
sharing in that space,
Yes.
and then really help each other to do that well.
Absolutely. And maybe choose 2 tech tools that will enable it. So instead of going, here are 20 tools that could,
Yeah.
it's actually, these is our purpose in terms of teaching and learning and pedagogy. Can we choose 2 things that will help us to
Yeah.
do that?
Oh,
Are we
I love
going to
this.
do some polling? Are
Yes.
we going to create a virtual wall where learners can put reflective comments, like by using Padlet, for example? We don't need more in the toolkit than is needed. I think we do need to keep coming back to that. Otherwise, people are feeling this pressure to become a singing and dancing online designer, which I think is not what it's about.
No, definitely not. We could chat about all things, because there's tons that we've mentioned before we recorded, but I think we've covered a lot there today actually. And
Yeah.
we wanted to talk a little bit about collaboration, and I think for me at the minute there's a little bit more thinking there to do, but I'm aware that we might go down a route where online learning doesn't fully utilize collaborative learning, because
Yeah.
we've not quite worked out how to do it
I think that's really a smart point. Yeah, insightful. I think I'm hearing lots of teachers say they realise now they're getting quite good at doing a PowerPoint with voiceover,
yeah.
or making a short video clip using a variety of different tools. And so they're kind of giving content, but maybe they're starting to realise they're giving the content, but they're not getting as much interaction from that. So some people have said to me on things like video, they've realised if they record a video or source a video and then they put it into Edpuzzle or H5P,
Mm,
they can embed tasks in, questions in,
yeah.
and they can then watch on the system and look at how learners are interacting with
Yeah.
that. And that helps them get a sense of actually that the learners have interacted with the resource. The
Mhm.
next stage is, how do I build a task into my live learning session that encourages the learners to discuss or reflect or take the thinking forward related to the material that they've looked at in their own time. So it's building that bridge between what they do at home with the resources and how we build the collaboration in the live session. Also, how we can build collaborative space for them talking on a Google form or on
Yeah.
a Microsoft form, something where they're actually putting thoughts together when they're at home.
Yeah, because we know the power of collaborative learning. The evidence shows us collaborative learning is powerful.
Absolutely.
And I think there is some more thinking to do. And I'll be interested. I'm going to try and speak to some more people, I think, specifically about collaborative learning,
Yeah.
interested in what people are doing. But, in the classroom, you might plan and structure a group work activity. So now it's, again, finding the technology that allows you to provide the solution to still do that.
That's right.
Because otherwise learners could just start to get a little bit bored of the same
Completely.
one-dimensional sort of receiving of information and interacting with information, but not necessarily working with others and
Together.
applying it in a group sort of situation.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think there's
And to get high quality of that, I think is maybe the next challenge.
yes, big challenges, Joanne.
More to talk about.
Lots more to talk about. Like you say, we could probably record every day.
Every day, yeah.
So lovely to see you and to have you
Great.
and to chat to you. So thanks so much, and I'll speak to you soon.
Great. Thanks for that.
Bye, Joanne.
Bye.